Good morning. Welcome to the New School and also to Eugene Lang College, the liberal arts college within the New School. My name is Stephanie Browner, and I'm the new dean at Eugene Lang College. I got here about 2 months ago. And it is a pleasure to welcome you to this morning's program. First, I want to tell you a few things about the college. Most of us are somewhere engaged with education at this conference and learning about schools, and what we're doing is part of what is a sort of side benefit of coming to the New School, to New York City, to learn about what we're doing here in the city. So Eugene Lang College is a liberal arts college 4-year program for typically traditionally aged US students, international students also. But it's really a distinctive college in that it is explicitly progressive and committed to social justice. It is sort of in this urban environment and it has a very permeable boundary with the city and also with the New School. So it's not a standalone liberal arts college, which has a strong tradition in America, obviously, but rather a liberal arts college within the setting of the New School. And that means it has the advantage of having the design thinking that happens in Parsons, the sort of public policy work that happens in some of our graduate programs in the New School for Public Engagement. There are also several conservatories at the New School, and many students do multiple programs. So it's really a remarkably rich place for undergraduate liberal arts education, and yet we remain true to some basic small classes, lots of interaction with the faculty. And I've been here for 2 months, and it is a remarkable faculty. Lots of great part-timers from the city. Usually part-timers are considered a problem and a sort of negative experience for students, but not when they are practitioners here in the city of their work, whether it's journalism, science and policy, artists, dancers, etc. So that's a welcome to this college. Send students you know this way if you think anyone would be interested. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. The first, Mike Wesch, will speak for 30 minutes. Mike Wesch is currently the Associate Professor of Cultural Anthropology at Kansas State, and he holds the Kaufman Chair for Distinguished Teaching Scholar. He's committed to new media literacy and teaching at a state university. He's also committed to teaching well in the large lecture format when that's what he's given. You may know his work. It's on YouTube. A Vision of Students Today was the first video YouTube clip that I saw that became important to my own work. He also has created an undergraduate sort of laboratory working group called Digital Ethnography Working Group, and he's also created a world simulation game for use in class. I also got to know Mike's work. A colleague of mine at my former institution introduced me to his work, and I started watching A Vision of Students Today. And what I find remarkable about that work is it is students speaking not just through a class project, but to the world. And when I needed to introduce our Board of Trustees to students today and get it into the boardroom, I used Mike's work. Those students are saying who they are with the technologies and the languages of today in remarkably powerful ways that help all of us understand what we need to do with education, I think. The second person I'm introducing today is Lev Manovich. He is a professor of visual arts at the University of California in San Diego. He is an artist, an animator, a designer, a programmer. You probably know his work because of ImagePlot, which is a software application that allows you to manipulate images based on the data within that image. If you haven't used it, I have not, but I gather it's powerful and gives us new ways to think about working with images. You may know his work with Flickr and the images there and how to sort and rework those images collectively as sort of a database. He has a lab that he calls the Software Studies Initiative, and you may know his book, Software Takes Command. What I see in our talks today are people who move across different spaces of the classroom, the lab, and the studio. And for me, that's a metaphor of what we do at the New School, what we do at Eugene Lang College, and what all of us are now doing as we move education way beyond the ivory tower out into laboratories that are public, laboratories that are museums, on the streets, with practitioners, as well as still often in our classrooms with students. Finally, a couple of details about the conference. You may have already heard this. There will be more information coming about a retreat In 2012, Trevor tells me he's rented a cottage in the Catskills, which should be beautiful, and for about 40 to 50 people to continue this conversation. There will be the MIT book that comes out of the conference, and there will also be a conference in 2013 entitled The Internet as Soapbox and Barricade. So it is my pleasure to welcome you and to welcome Mike and Lev. They will each speak for 30 minutes and then 15 minutes for questions for Mike right after his talk, and then another 15 minutes for Lev for questions for him. Thank you very much.
All right. So last night, there are actually a few of you I can see that were actually in the room last night, and we had this little workshop. And the first thing we did was I asked people to define what learning is for them and to put it in their name tag and then walk around and try to find other people who share the same idea about what learning is all about. And we ended up with a really large group over in that corner in the back, the biggest group in the room, and that biggest group said that curiosity is what it's all about. And so now I've had 12 hours or so to sort of mull that over, and I think that that's not just true, it's actually deeply true. And if you could teach just one thing to your students, it would have to be curiosity. And to just spell that out a little bit, that would mean that we need to stop giving answers and actually inspire questions, because questions are really the gateway to knowledge creation. Knowledge isn't just sitting out there in the world to be accepted into the brain. You actually have to have a question that makes that answer right for that moment. So question asking to me is really the heart of what learning is all about. And if you buy into that and then you start looking around and you see how we're teaching across almost any educational institution, you start to see that some things are sort of out of sync with that. And I'll just demonstrate a few of these things. First off, this is my classroom. And the first thing you'll notice is that this is not a place that inspires question asking. This is a place that is all about information dumping from one person to another, not anything about question asking. I was just reading Neil Postman on the way here, and he has this great quote. He says that not only do our educational institutions not teach question asking, they don't teach it in the most devastating way possible by creating environments that do not inspire question asking. So this is a terrible situation. And in my own experience, I started teaching about 7 years ago, and I, from the very beginning, had this idea, okay, I want to inspire really big questions. I want to inspire really big thoughts and ideas and that type of thing. And I took a break about halfway through the semester. There was a midterm coming up, and I just started listening for the questions they were asking. And I was very disappointed to find the questions looking like this. How many points is this worth? How long does this paper need to be? What do we need to know for this test? I mean, these are questions that are actually putting limits on learning. These are not the type of big open questions that we'd like to see. Some other observations about, if you really focus on question asking as the heart of all this, is just notice the students themselves. I mean, every time I walk into one of these lecture halls, I get this phrase comes into my mind from Alpha North Whitehead. He talked about soul murder, and you look at these students, and it's just like almost the moment you start lecturing, there's just a total disengagement. I mean, here, let me describe what this is like. Okay, you walk in, 400 students or so in the room, and it's just buzzing with activity. Everybody's sharing all these memories of what just happened, over the summer, over the winter break or whatever. And then you start lecturing, and it's just like, whoa, what happened? You guys were so lively, so energetic, and now just, soul murder. So this is an issue. Third observation I'd make is that while some of my colleagues in the hallways, when I complain about soul murder, they say, well, it's just this generation. It's just, they're sort of a tuned out group, that kind of thing. And, over the years, I've been sort of trying to learn more about this generation. One of the things I noticed just by watching is that you'll see this generation here looks like this, but this is the same generation here. And so one of these environments is very engaging to them, and one of them is not. So there's something wrong here. And this actually indicates something else, which I would add to this third observation. That is that these students live in the modern world, which is a world in which your identity and your recognition are not given to you. You have to seek those things out. And so, that's what this is all about. This is not just seeking fame. It's trying to seek a place in the world, seek some sorts of significance. And as you think about that, you can see just what a failure this type of room and environment can be. And if you've seen this video we did, some of the stats that illustrate this, they're buying $100 textbooks they're not opening, paying for class but not showing up. They complete about 49% of the readings assigned to them. That was a survey across the whole university. And they find only 26% relevant to their life, which I see as a 74% failure rate on our part. Technology in the classroom looks like this. I bring my laptop to class, but I'm not working on class stuff. This is actually legitimate because as she opened this, her friend IM'd her. So this is something that was an ongoing issue. And then Facebooking through their classes. We all know these issues. But of course, this is illustrating something else, which I'll state as the fourth observation, which is that there's literally something in the air. The something in the air is Wi-Fi access. And that Wi-Fi access means that with any one of multiple devices that they have on them, they can access 2 billion people on the planet who are connecting and collaborating and ultimately sharing what amounts to almost the entire body of human knowledge is in the air all around them. That makes things pretty interesting. If you could picture what's in the air all around us, it might look something like this. But really, that's just the beginning, because if anybody's paying attention, you'll notice that we're headed towards ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous communication, ubiquitous information at unlimited speed about everything, everywhere, from anywhere, and all kinds of devices, which makes it ridiculously easy to connect, organize, share, collect, collaborate, and publish with anybody, to anybody in the world, which makes the hallmark of this classroom especially irrelevant, which is this standardized test. So this seems completely out of place. And this is really just the beginning, because here I've just talked about information being everywhere. But the reality is that that networked environment that we're talking about affects the entire world. So sociologists have been talking now for 3 decades about a shift to a network society, that we're moving away from hierarchies and groups to more networks and network logic. And it's affecting how stuff is produced, how stuff is consumed, our financial markets, how we organize socially, our family life. Every aspect of our lives is being affected by a shift away from hierarchies and groups into networks and network logic. And things aren't actually panning out so great. I mean, a lot of us are sort of optimists about this kind of environment. It's empowering and so on. But if you check the scorecard, in the last 3 decades that we've moved more and more towards network logic, we are more and more unequal. We have more and more poverty, more and more just all around. You could make any long list of devastating effects over the past 3 decades, which makes it especially disconcerting then that our students are not asking interesting questions, that they're tuning out of class, that they're seeking meaning through rather superficial means, and that they see this not as the world's greatest collaboration device, which it is, but instead as a distraction device. And they are not, in any sense, really remaking the world as we might want them to. And so in my own work, I face very large classrooms. It's very challenging, of course. But for me, it's all about making a shift from simply just delivering knowledge and having my students being knowledgeable and knowing a bunch of stuff to being knowledge able. And I know it's a buzzword. It's cheesy, whatever you want, but it's just like a little mantra for myself, right? That this is about more than just delivering information. This is about inspiring students to be knowledge able, about able to find, sort, analyze, criticize, and create new information, make new connections, all of that kind of thing. And it's just really hard. I'm going to tell you about how hard it is. I'm also going to share with you how that knowledge ability is changing as media change. So I think for a long time we had a good sense of what knowledge ability was all about. And now in this environment, it's starting to shift, and we're not quite sure where to go. And I'm going to try to paint a picture of where we should go next. So let's start with stuff we know. First off, I want to sort of set the groundwork here. I come from a background of anthropology and a little bit of media ecology. And the basic foundational argument there is that media are not just tools. They shape what can be said, who can say it, how it can be said, and so on. And beyond that, they're not even just means of communication either. They shape how we connect with one another. So you're ultimately talking about the fact that media mediate relationships. They shape how we connect with one another, who we connect with, and so on. So when media change, our relationships change. And if you go back to what is still the most dominant medium of our times, television, you can see instantly how it shapes relationships just by looking at any American living room. All the chairs have to face the corner of the room where the television sits. And of course, this isn't just the American living room. For a lot of families, this is the dining room. So this is a transformation in the American dining experience. And Neil Postman did a great analysis of this in the mid-'80s in Amusing Ourselves to Death. If If you haven't read it, I'll quickly summarize it in about 60 seconds. It goes something like this. The conversations of our culture are happening here on television. They're controlled by the few and designed for the masses. Because they're designed for the masses, they have to always be entertaining, even the serious ones. So our politics devolve into 8-second sound bites, which we're all familiar with, all of which is punctuated by 30-second commercials. And those 30-second commercials and all of that conversations create our culture, which he describes as one of irrelevance, incoherence, and impotence. The irrelevance and incoherence are not so hard to see. The impotence is kind of interesting. He asks you to imagine, he's writing this in 1984, published in 1985. He asks you, so you're sitting there in the mid-'80s watching the most important newscast you can imagine. And he says, okay, now just take a moment and ask yourself, what steps do you plan to take to reduce the conflict in the Middle East, or the rates of inflation, crime, or unemployment? What do you plan to do about NATO, OPEC, the CIA, et cetera? And then he takes the liberty of answering for you. He says you plan to do nothing. And that's more or less what you could do in the mid-'80s. You had no way to talk back to media. You had no way to have your own voice. You could vote every 2 to 4 years, but otherwise wasn't much to be done because it's a one-way conversation. And now we're going to take this one more level and point out what it's doing to these kids when it's a one-way conversation and they recognize that you have to be on TV to have a voice. There's nothing more important to children and youth as finding their place and a sense of significance in the world. They start to realize they have to be on TV to be significant. They'll do anything to be significant on television. So you get things like the American Idol phenomenon. And you have this other side forming as well, which is we have the self-esteem movement throughout the 80s and 90s and into the present, which is convincing them that they can be the next American Idol. And then when they're not, they're shocked. And we watch on in amusement. And this, of course, is just a metaphor for much bigger issues, right? In which we have a whole generation now approaching the status of the lost generation of Japan with sort of broken promises, right? And a lot of them are right down on Liberty Plaza right now. Now, all of this I mentioned is this search for identity and recognition. And so it's much more than just about American Idol. It's about this broader search for identity and recognition. And as they're searching for identity and recognition, they're bombarded with media. And we know what kind of effect this can have. This is a Dove commercial demonstrating the effect on young girls, for example, and just that bombardment and the type of messages that are relayed at this critical moment of development.
Younger, smaller, lighter, but not tighter, thinner, softer.
And so for decades, as television has been the dominant medium, knowledge ability has always been critical thinking. We've always talked about critical thinking, and that's obviously very important. It remains very important. And it's sort of like, at least partially, we think of it as building a filter device for all the sort of BS that's in the world, right? And so critical thinking has been this hallmark of our teaching for quite some time. But I think, and I think you'll agree, that in this environment, it's not quite enough, or at least the tamed down sort of buzzword version of critical thinking is not enough. Because this is not a world that just comes at you. This is a world that you actually have to engage in and participate in. Minimally, all the information you're ever going to see in this world is something that you find. It doesn't just come at you. And so that changes things. And I want to just go back to the beginning of the sort of social media revolution here. This is an early video. This is one of the first videos to ever go viral on YouTube. But what's interesting about it is it actually starts not as something that's supposed to go viral on YouTube. It's just this guy who's your sort of quintessential lonely individual of the late 20th century and early 21st century. He's looking for a hug. He's down on the malls of Sydney. And eventually somebody gives him a hug. And then, like any old school social movement, it spreads person to person, hand to hand. More people take up the sign, more people giving hugs. And then it does get on YouTube, and this is now 2006. YouTube's just launched. It gets tens of millions of views. And then a lot of the things that we think about social media and how it works immediately take effect. Suddenly, small individual actions become large collective actions. A global movement emerges. People organizing these movements through social media. And thousands of these events happen over the coming years. And of course, social media isn't just about the sort of spread and movement. There's also always this parody and talkback kind of thing. So here's the spoofster here.
These are really, really good. And they're not as smelly as the hippie hugs.
And sometimes these spoofs are very serious, and these are the really important ones that everybody stands up and pays attention to and realizes, like, oh, we live in a different world now. I'll show you one. I showed you the Dove commercial earlier, which, you know, some people noted that there's a bit of hypocrisy there, this beauty company saying don't listen to beauty companies. And some people have remixed that. There's some really interesting remixes. One of the more interesting remakes, not so much a remix, but a remake, is this one here. So about 2 weeks after this was released, it had about 1 million views, and the guys who created this were invited to the table with Unilever, which is Dove's parent company, and Unilever signed a moratorium on rainforest deforestation. So this was an immediately pretty dramatic impact, demonstrating that, of course, this is not a one-way conversation. But really, this is just the beginning. I mean, we're starting to see then, I mean, when I watch that video, I think, don't we want to create students who can do that, you know, like that can talk back to the system in some way, to actually have a voice within this larger world? And to me, that's, you know, a lot of people talk about information literacy, but I think it's even a little bit beyond information literacy as well. And I'll just give you an example here. The classic information literacy problem is one of sort of being able to find and then sort and analyze information and basically be able to know where it's coming from, that kind of thing. So here's a classic example. You have weforum.org, which is the World Economic Forum website, and then you have we-forum.org, which is actually not the World Economic Forum website, even though it looks just like it. So there's this like classic information literacy problem, like which one is right, and so, you know, you'd want your students to like verify sources and that kind of thing. But I think there's actually something much more interesting going on here, which is it's demonstrating a level of media literacy that we should be aiming for. Not to be able to distinguish between these two, but to be able to create this one. Like, this is what our students should be able to do. They should be able to have the skills that it takes to create something like this, and not just the skills, but of course the imagination it takes, and the ability to see beyond surfaces and so on, so you can even come up with the idea for this. And this is quite remarkable. I mean, if you click on any of these videos, they actually work. So if you click on the Queen here, you get...
The source of our financial treasure was the violent plundering of the Southern Hemisphere. Going forward, legislation will commence to allocate some of my lands to ensure fairer, more just distribution for those victimized and to improve the livelihoods of the world's poor.
So very slick, right? And to me, this is exactly the level of media literacy and ultimately sort of what I'll call global citizenship that I want my students to achieve. This is done by the Yes Men, who are great impersonators, and they do identity correction of major corporations and organizations. They've often fool major media organizations into thinking they're something they're not. So here they're representing Dow Chemical on the BBC. Lots of great stories about them. They have some documentaries out you can check out. But what I really like about them is the way they demonstrate the social imagination, which Maxine Greene described as the capacity to invent visions of what should be and could be in our deficient society. And it strikes me that that is really what we should be trying to create in our students. It has within it that curiosity, that question asking that I've been talking about, but it defines it, I think, in a deeper level and demonstrates something especially interesting as we try to move from simply being information literate, that is able to find, sort, analyze, and even criticize information, but actually moving on to something like digital citizenship. And by digital citizenship, I don't mean like being a good person on Facebook and Twitter and like not saying offensive things. I mean actually being effective world changers through this new media environment and in this new media environment. And I say all this because, as it turns out, there's nobody left to blame. Like, I think we spent decades blaming big media for so many of our problems. And to the extent that this is our new media world, we have nobody left to blame because this is exactly what we make of it. It's no more, no less than what we make of it. And we have this double responsibility as educators of actually creating the people who ultimately create this environment. So if you don't like this environment, then we need to do a better job at what we're doing. There's no better rubric for how well we are doing as educators than to look online and see if you like what you see. If you don't like what you see, something's wrong with education. And of course, the challenges are great because we teach in rooms like this. And I just want to take a moment, the beginning of this video that we made is back to this core idea that media are not just tools, and actually looking at the classroom itself as a medium. And so if students learn what they do, this is a classic John Dewey idea, what are they learning sitting here? And of course what they learn is that the information is up at the front of the room with the sage on the stage, that they should follow along. And so one of the things we did during this process, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this video, so I'm not going to play the whole thing, but one of the things we did is we actually did a brainstorming process where we spent actually a couple weeks just brainstorming what does this room say? Like, what is it saying about education? What does it say about learning? And there's a great sort of exercise in sort of cultural criticism. And here's a short list from a very, very long list of things we came up with. One is that the walls seem to say that to learn is to acquire information. And if you do any sort of thinking about what education is all about, that's a very weak form of learning. Like this idea that you just sort of stuff things in your head and you start to know more and more facts. Real learning typically happens at a moment in which you have kind of an intellectual throwdown with yourself and you have to challenge all your taken for granted assumptions and see the world in a new way. That's where real learning happens. So this acquire information thing is not very useful. The second thing this seems to suggest is that the information is scarce, so you have to come to this room where you will get delivered this information. And meantime, it runs quite counter to the fact that 2 billion people are in the air connecting and collaborating. Ultimately, it says that you should trust authority for good information, the sage on the stage. The chairs don't move anywhere, so it's basically saying that authorized information is beyond discussion. And ultimately, it's saying you should obey the authority and follow along. I wouldn't mention any of these things if I didn't think these were relevant to all of our educational institutions, because it turns out that this room is really just a manifestation of basic assumptions about what learning is all about, and they permeate almost all of our classrooms. I find it in small 10-person classrooms where students show up just waiting for you to tell them the answers. It's almost everywhere, and we have to start moving beyond it. Now, one of the interesting things is to look at people who have moved beyond it, especially students who get frustrated with the system, who've been turned on somehow. They have the curiosity, they have that knack to be that digital citizen that I'm advocating for, and then they're in the classroom and they just find it stifling and they just drop out. That's what happened with Sean Ahmed. He's a Toronto native, and he was at Notre Dame studying sociology, and essentially he was inspired by Jeffrey Sachs, who said that we could end poverty in our lifetimes. And he's sitting there in classes and he's thinking, okay, well, it's not happening here. So he drops out of Notre Dame, grabs a camera, goes to Bangladesh, starts making videos about what poverty actually looks like and posts them on YouTube. In the process, he gets almost 300,000 Twitter followers, and he starts to remake what charity should look like. Almost totally by accident, he starts remaking what charity and NGOs might be able to do in a networked world, because people on YouTube started saying, hey, let me help out, let me send a donation. And so he just sort of, on the fly, started creating a new type of organization.
You guys, through your votes and video responses, will decide how I will be spending some of this donation money.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Sean.
We donated. We were very, very glad to do so.
Here is my vote. Rebuild the school.
And to me, this starts to get at what I mean by digital citizenship, in which it's not just a one-way conversation, but helping our students realize that not only is it not a one-way conversation, but it's not even really a conversation, that it can be so much more than that. And the music in that background is actually the perfect metaphor for understanding what I mean. The music is actually produced on OP Sound, where Colin Muchler here, he submits his guitar track, which you can hear here. And then Cora Beth, who's on the other side of the country, decides to add her violin to that. And then hundreds of other people have added tracks here that anybody can download and add. So Bovrek takes all of these and he adds the drum beat. And that's where you get the music that you heard in the background of that. And this is actually, to me, a metaphor for how the great stuff of the online world can happen, in which different people sort of stand up with a certain confidence, a certain inspiration and joy, and they find their voice and they share it, and then other people add their voice on top of that. And that's what I like about music as the metaphor for the great innovations online and the great things that our students might be able to achieve. So here's Eric Whitaker's project. And again, just thinking about it metaphorically, how each one of these people is finding their voice, and can we help our students find their voice, find the confidence to share their voice. And when they do, their voice gets added to this chorus, and all these other people adding on top of it make something much more beautiful than otherwise could exist. Of course, this gets serious, right? There are real serious examples that we could point out, like in Kenya after the elections in 2007, late 2007, these 4 Kenyans get together and create Ushahidi, which allows people anywhere with ordinary cell phones to send in updates about what's happening on the ground, where they are, and then receive updates also based on where they are. And of course, the beauty of this is that it unleashes 40,000 citizen reporters who can help us understand what's happening when traditional media is broken down. And even better, they give away that platform so other people can build on it later. So 3 years later, when the Haiti earthquake happens, you have these students at Tufts University who take the same platform and they make it Ushahidi Haiti, and they start receiving messages, first hundreds, then thousands, then ultimately tens of thousands of messages. They look like this. We're looking for Gaby Joseph, who got buried under Underwell University. These are being translated by 5,000 Haitians spread throughout the world and then plotted on the map. The map they're using is not Google Maps because it's not good enough. They're using OpenStreetMap, which is itself a collaboration of thousands of people around the world. And those are the maps that are actually on the ground. And you can see what here Clark Craig of the U.S. Marine Corps has to say about it. He's saving lives every day. I wish I had time to document every example, but there are too many. I say with confidence that there are hundreds of these kinds of success stories. The Marine Corps is using your project every second of the day to get aid and assistance to those that need it most. And so that takes us back to where we started with students who, in a way, need to be inspired and awakened to their curiosity, to change the world in productive ways, to see this not as a distraction device, but as what it could be, the world's greatest collaboration machine ever invented. And in the process, what I've found with my own students as I get them more involved in this kind of thing, is they start to realize that this core agenda that they've had, which is to find themselves, to find significance in their lives, to find out who they are, this sort of meaning-seeking activity, is actually a little misguided, because we actually don't end up finding meaning anywhere. We ultimately create meaning. We create who we are. We create our significance. And that's quite a turn for them, and something that I think lives on with them far beyond my own classes. And the real beauty of this is when I start seeing students who stop asking silly questions like, what do we need to know for this test? And they start asking, what do we need to know for this test, the test of our lives? Thanks.